It's pretty remarkable for the two of us to be on stage here together, considering where we both know where we came from. Dan and I, we have to confess, we've been around Beijing going way back, and we've sort of watched with horror and fascination as the other's career has taken off. So it's good to see you in front of such a big crowd. It's good to see that you actually draw such a big crowd.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, Shai. I think they're mostly here to hear from you because the information is such a great source. So thank you.
All right. So you got the information. Subscribe. You'll learn all the inside. So we want to know. When I think of Tencent, I think of WeChat, and when I think of WeChat, I think of China and a domestic market. But in fact, Tencent has a huge international presence that most people may not be aware of. So talk to me about that. Sort of give me a lay of the land.
Yeah, so Tencent obviously is one of the largest Chinese internet value-added services companies and actually has been going international for many years. I've only been at the company for 5 years, so I'm a relative newcomer. Many people at the company have been around 10, 15, 20 years since its inception. Very early days, actually, the company had set up an office in Palo Alto in order to liaise with Western companies. In fact, I first got to know Tencent back in the early O's when I was working with Google. I got to know their Tencent Palo Alto office back then because at the time Google was powering the search behind QQ.com. And it was always very impressive how the Tencent team operated. And since then they've grown, or we've grown to become a much more international company. We now have offices all around the world. We have quite a few in Europe, quite a few in America, as well as in other locations across Southeast Asia, et cetera. But we're headquartered in Shenzhen, right across the border here from Hong Kong, and so we're really happy that the RISE conference came to Hong Kong, sort of on our backyard, as it were, and see so many startups coming from around the region and around the world to come visit us here. So we're really happy to have everyone here.
So, and what kind of, is Tencent's international presence, is it one of operations or investments?
So I think there's both. There's, just to be perfectly clear, I'm relatively new to the investment side. I'm coming from the operations side of the business. I've been working for Tencent Games for the past, most of the last 5 years. And, we have a very active international presence on the games front. Tencent actually has many different areas of business. And many people aren't familiar with all the businesses. Even sometimes internally, it's hard to keep track of all the different businesses we have. But Tencent Games is one of the 6 business groups, and it's one of the larger business groups within the company. And it's been one of the most international groups from the beginning because most people in the gaming industry know this, but not necessarily people in the internet or digital media business, that actually Tencent Games got a lot of their start from working with foreign developers bringing their games into China.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because I think, initially Tencent was looking as gaming is a particularly interesting field. I think Tencent is now the biggest publisher of games by revenue in the world. That's globally, and you own most of the world's most popular games, or have a piece of the world's most popular games, doing pretty well. But it had an interesting start, right? I think it was the initial impetus for the overseas interest was bringing games in, right? And can you talk about that process, that story?
Right. So first of all, I always like to ask if I'm, the level of maturity of the audience in terms of gaming. So how many people here would say they're actually gamers? Self-identify as a gamer?
Wow, not many.
Okay.
Don't be embarrassed.
Anybody playing console games? PlayStation, Xbox? Okay. PC games? League of Legends? Or, okay. Mobile games?
Angry Birds?
Come on, Candy Crush? Okay. So anyways, all right, it's good to know. So we've got some gamers in the audience. The China gaming market, I didn't know this because I'm not actually a gamer. I just pretend to be one. But
you should see his rig. It's nice.
The Chinese gaming market back in the day, 10, 15 years ago, was all RPGs, role-playing games. They're very popular, and especially in North Asia, and Korea and China have not had console markets, mostly PC markets. You play these free-to-play role-playing games that you play for many, many hours online. And Tencent at the time wanted to get into gaming and decided to start by first trying to do an RPG, and it actually failed utterly. And then there were
Tencent failed at something.
Yes, it does happen quite often, in fact.
Wow.
And then the next attempt was say, all right, we don't know how to design a really good game, but we're really good at transferring bits and bytes across the internet and we understand, technology and how to get people to play online at the same time. So they started looking at Chinese tabletop games, similar to, Chinese chess or mahjong or card games, and built multiplayer. The first game was a multiplayer, sort of online. I think this is like 2003, 2004 timeframe, where you could actually play your friends online at the same time using QQ to chat and then play this game in real time. And to be able to play real time on a computer back then was relatively rare and it had some modest success. And so Tencent said, okay, now we're going to go get third-party games because we don't have any in-house studios. So they went around the world, and the interesting thing about the Tencent management team is many of them are, in fact, pretty hardcore gamers. And so they went and said, we like to play non-RPG games. We like to play strategy games. We like to play shooters. We like to play racing games. It can't be that all Chinese gamers are only going to play RPGs. So they went looking for a shooting game, and there were no big shooters in China at the time. And Tencent didn't have a reputation as publishing games very strongly, so we couldn't necessarily get the really big-name shooter games. We found this little company in Korea that was willing to take a chance on us with this little game called Crossfire. And we brought it into China, and we did a ton of modifications. I heard the team telling me the story. I think they spent about a year modifying it to make sure it worked for Chinese gamers. And there are a few things that needed to happen. First of all, it needs to work on a low-end PC.
Right, this is the era where few people own their own laptops. It was mostly those smoke-filled internet cafes with the plastic chairs. You have to imagine sort of like, they look like down-budget versions of off-track betting centers.
But early 2000s, dial-up access from home or internet cafes, as you mentioned, very different environment from most places. So usually internet cafe owners were not buying the highest end PCs, and so you needed to make sure the low-end graphics cards, and you needed to make sure a shooter, which is a very twitchy game, could still work. And so you maybe had to lower the quality of the graphics a little bit. And then you had gamers who had never actually played a shooting game. And if you haven't played a shooting game, I recommend you go try one. And if you've never played it before, you're going to get, popped pretty early in the game because you don't really know what you're doing and the other good players are running around. So they had to add in all these tips and a very strong introductory process. The first time a new player goes through the game, you have to do a new player tutorial to make sure.
China's so long, you think in Chinese first. Okay.
Western games don't emphasize the tutorial as much.
非常地道的中国人, right? Okay.
受宠若惊. So the tutorial had to be, so I apologize for going too much into Crossfire, but ended up after a year of modifications for the Chinese market being a huge success. And we introduced sort of the shooting genre to China. And from there, after a couple of years, we then brought another Korean game, Dungeon Fighter, which sort of introduced this more action game. And then a couple of years later, a MOBA game called League of Legends, which ended up becoming sort of the biggest game in the world. And then sports, and then dancing, and then et cetera. And each genre, as we introduced it into China, we then became known and respected by Chinese gamers as the one who brought in the good style of that game into China. So while everybody has an RPG, really only Tencent was layering on these new types of games into China, and we were able to enjoy a lot of success from that.
Interesting. And so a lot of it was about acculturation, about tweaking the game for the domestic culture, whether it be the realities of what kind of laptops people are using, or the familiarity with RPGs. So for example, I don't play video games because I die within 2 seconds, and I'm not good there. So talk about the next thing that happened though was the shift from the desktop to mobile.
Yeah, so the shift to desktop to mobile, I remember when teams used to have internet companies in China used to have a mobile team or a mobile department that kind of took the internet and then the internet products and then made a mobile version of them. And then, after a while, I remember 5 or 6 years ago when I joined the company, one of the guys interviewing me asked me, "What do you think about the mobile internet?" And I was like, "Isn't that just the internet now?"
That's
become mobile. And again, sorry to riff on the gaming side too much, but mobile games, we have the same thing, because in the rest of the world, most mobile gamers will modify their product to work on iOS devices and sort of the top 10 Android devices. Whereas in China, there's about 1,000 Android phones that you need to make sure your game works well. There's really the top 500, you're probably doing okay, but if you really want to cover the whole market, you need the top 1,000 models. And each of them have a slightly different sort of screen size and the battery power that goes to the CPU. And so you have to make sure that your game, and lots of them break because they update their version of Android, and then your game suddenly doesn't work on it. And so that's one of the reasons why it's difficult for foreign mobile games to be brought into China. But yeah, as we saw the shift occur from desktop to mobile. Obviously, on the messaging side, Tencent was able to successfully navigate that transition. Relatively well-known story of the teams, one becoming mobile QQ, one becoming WeChat, both very successful. And then we also introduced mobile games on top of those platforms. And the mobile gaming era has been very good to us because Chinese users, Chinese gamers, really like to play games. And it's been a great market. It's now, I think, $110 or $120 billion market globally in the gaming sector. I saw the report yesterday from the SCMP and Abacus. And I think China's up to about $30 billion of that, they said now. And so if you add China plus Korea and Japan, that's about half the global market for gaming.
Interesting. Now, do you find that when you as Tencent approach a foreign studio, that they know who you, by now I assume they must know who you guys are and are thrilled to pieces that you're interested in talking to them, or do they go running to the hills and hide under the tables when it's, the giant Tencent is in town?
Well, it's been an interesting time. So I joined the company 5 years ago, and my first year I went to Slush, which is a big tech event held in Helsinki every year, and we teamed up with the Independent Game Developers Association to sponsor a happy hour, and we rented a bar, and we brought in 1,000 little penguins, or penguin mascot, and set them around the bar, and we invited 500 of our Finland-based game developers to meet with us, and we gave a presentation. We're Tencent, and if you want to bring your game to China, please come talk to us. And literally after the talk, half a dozen people came up and asked me, so you guys are a translation house, or you guys are an outsourcing shop, or we weren't well known.
Only 5 years ago.
This is only 5 years ago, yeah. So we weren't very well known around the world, and I think, but we were well known within sort of certain segments. Like if you had a game and you wanted to bring it to Asia, then we were good. But if you were a small developer and you were focused on sort of the Western markets, you didn't think about finding a Korean publisher, finding a Japanese publisher, finding a Chinese publisher. You just wanted to make sure that you got your game out there. I think the change that's happened in the past few years is that the market's become a bit more unified. We've continued to enjoy continued success in China. We've had several more examples of successful sort of foreign games that we've brought into China. And so within the gaming sector now, we're relatively well known. And now in lots of other different sectors, we also see members of our operational team starting to go abroad and sort of start to make a name for themselves. And so, yeah, we have a bit better name recognition these days.
Interesting. So what are the other sectors that Tencent's looking to go abroad? I know your background is in gaming, so I'm taking you outside your comfort zone. But just so people who are pitching and thinking about how to get Dan to cut you $1 billion check, which he's not officially... above my pay grade. But I think so. If you look writ large, we're very interested in sort of anything that makes the lives better throughout using the internet and informatization, which is occurring in order to make people's real lives and digital lives better. It's kind of broad, but it is actually how we look at the world. If there's really no technology angle, it's hard for us to get involved. We don't think we can add a lot of value. There's a lot of tension that we have, and people ask us what sectors we're looking at and what kind of investors we are, and are we a financial investor looking for pure returns, or are we a strategic investor looking to have synergies with our business? And I think the answer is of course both. And in addition, the Venn diagram should include a third bucket, which is some way where we can add unique value. If there's a way that we can add extra value, like in the gaming side, where we would talk to a studio and say, we want a different version of your game for China. And they'd say, we don't have enough people to make that version. We'd say, okay, why don't we invest in you, give you some money so that you can hire more people to make a different version that will then bring in China, and then you'll become a much more valuable company overall because you'll now have this big game in China as well as a big game internationally. And that sort of bringing great content to Chinese users, and that satisfies there's a great financial return, there's a great strategic angle, and we have a unique sort of ability to add value there. And so that's really the best sort of place where we can be. So that could be biotech or fintech or I don't know. Obviously, gaming. There's no real one sector that's a particular focus or one that you automatically exclude.
Well, I think we have a relatively large corporation, but we have organization now. But we have some sectors that we're more experienced in. And so if you bring us a company or a pitch that's something based around social, anything based around content, whether it's gaming content or music content or video content or news content, any digital content related play, things around fintech, things around cloud or around advertising. These are relatively big parts of our organization. We have people internally that we can turn to and who are experts in the field, and we can say, does this make sense? Is this something that you need? Is this the future direction? Are these guys executing well? And we have internal expertise that we can tap in order to make a more informed decision. If it's something in another area that's sort of a little bit beyond our ken, it's a little bit harder for us to get comfortable. It's not to say that we necessarily won't do it, but it's a little bit harder to get over that hump.
Now, people compare Tencent to Facebook in terms of your massive reach and your valuation and perhaps the ambition. And Facebook talks about connecting the whole world. But it seems that Tencent is still, while it has this international presence, it's really still about providing services to its billion users within China. Is that a correct analysis? Is that a fair way to look at it? Do you think it's still really about how can we improve the lives and service the lives of our users within China, or is there also thinking okay, we've done China really well, let's start figuring out about India, Indonesia, or wherever else?
Well, I think it depends on who you talk to in the organization. I mean, our founder talks about 连接一切, connecting everything. So we started with connecting people, and then there's connecting people to each other, then there's connecting people to services, there's connecting people to devices, and then connecting between services, between devices. As you connect more things into the network effect gets stronger, and it can be more beneficial for everybody. And there's certainly large portions of the organization that are focused on deepening the connections, let's say, amongst existing users. There's also parts of the organization that look at trying to get new users. So if you talk to somebody, like myself, I look at international investments. So I think international is very important, but I'm just a very small portion of the overall organization. So I think there's drives among some parts of the organization to sort of increase breadth, and then others to sort of go deeper. I think the people going deeper have probably been more successful so far because they've had a lot of success in China and have done a great job. And if we can add value to our existing base of users and continue to do that, I think that's something that we're all in favor of.
I'll ask you a theoretical question that's not about Tencent, but let's go really broad. Can a Chinese company go international like a Facebook? Is that because I hear Western critics say, oh, the Chinese, their home market is so big, there's no reason for them to even think about it. If you got 1 billion people back home and it's a protected market in some ways because of the Great Firewall, why? And people are paying your money, you're doing well. Why even bother thinking about it? Much less the cultural barriers. It's just different. Is that? Do you think that's a wrong-headed mindset?
I don't know. That's a good question. I think based on personal experience, we've both been in China for a long time, and I remember in the 90s and the O's, there were a lot of multinationals coming to China. And I think American companies, if you went back, say, pre-World War II, I don't know that American companies had that much international experience, per se.
Conquering helps, expansion.
Well, right. Economic growth and having larger, more successful companies that then look for growth around the world, because some could also say, America's such a big market, why would they go international? But obviously American companies have going international for a long time. And then if you were to look at Japanese companies sort of in the pre-1970s, I don't know how international they were. It feels like Chinese companies in general, and certainly, I mean, I've been the personal beneficiary of this with Tencent, are now looking to go to more international markets and sort of work with more international type of people, and so that's I think that's certainly a trend, but I think that comes along with sort of as an economy grows and a country becomes more companies within that country become more economically viable to go to new markets. But then each type of it would not be fair to say that Chinese companies have blind spots when they go international, but American companies don't have blind spots.
Right. Now, we've seen plenty of American companies die on the merits of their own policies when they landed in China's shores, right?
I think going international is difficult.
Yeah,
for any company coming from any country.
Right. So you've spent some time walking around the booths here. You going to plop a check in anybody's startup?
I traded a lot of name cards. I saw, it was a lot of great-looking, companies out there. We tend to look at companies, both large and small. We like to think of ourselves as a relatively across-the-board investor.
Yeah, but that's in fact unusual. I've heard other VCs say that it's very unusual for a corporate to actually cut sort of A share, relatively small check size. So you really run the gamut from almost, I don't think you do seed, but very early stage to very, very late stage, which just shows kind of a more, and some of the stuff is literally moonshot.
Well, there's some things that we're more familiar with. I think that, like earlier this year, we announced the Tencent Gameplay Innovation Fund, and looking for innovative new gameplay. And if you're a big game studio, you don't usually do major innovations on gameplay because it's very risky, because you're going to put 100 people to work for a couple of years. It's going to be very expensive, and so you want relatively assured returns. And often especially when there's a new platform like mobile gaming or on PC gaming, various platforms emerge, and you get teams of 5 or 10 or 15 people in a small studio can change the world. And so we actually have been investing in very early stage studios through that program, and we have a few other programs that invest in very early stage. But yeah, we do tend towards slightly mid to later stage investments. So many of the companies here that we've met here, not necessarily, it's hard for us to invest at the seed stage necessarily, although we do have a team that focuses on that. We usually want to stay in touch with people, though, because once you start showing traction and you are getting to your Series A, your Series B, and you are showing growth, we want to have known you for a year or two and already been tracking you and have been friends with you, and so that you remember to call us when it comes time for you to raise your next round. So it was really great to see a lot of the disruptive companies out in the booth today. What we're looking for is I would say is probably innovative business models, things that are looking to add a lot of value to people's lives in a large enough addressable market, and great founders. Especially in the early stages, great founders are really important.
Okay, so you see a lot of founders. What would you think is a characteristic of a great founder? Do they have to have a sort of mad glint in their eye, or they have to understand the finances deeply, or do they need to be like a Asperger's computer geek who just thinks of code, or what? Is there anything any trends that you've noticed, any features that you feel like this is the gal we need to put our money behind?
I don't know exactly, because if I had that magic bullet, I wish there was some simplistic. I've heard a lot of good answers from other people, and I won't try to repeat them all. I think all those types of people can be very successful founders. The one thing I was having, gone through the experience of having to being at a startup, running a startup that had to shut down and lay off people. I think I have a lot of sympathy for people who are making a go of it and can be successful. And I'm just really excited when anybody is doing well, and I have a lot more respect for that. I think I'd personally say the most important thing is probably grit and just the ability, the persistence, and to keep going. I didn't have that, and our startup shut down. But I got a lot of admiration for people who are in the trenches, as it were.
Do you prefer somebody who's had a series of, like a serial entrepreneur, or do you prefer the fresh?
Both are great examples. I mean, serial entrepreneurs are obviously, you have a lot easier time sort of raising money and because they've proven success track record behind them. But the future belongs to the youth, and quite often, old guys like us don't know what's going to change. Whereas young people, that's wrong. We should do it differently, and they come up with a great idea. So,
interesting. Now, what about does it need to be the product that's perfect, or do you place more emphasis on product or business model? Like, do you look at monetization first, or is it like, wow, this is really cool, we'll figure out how to make money later?
It depends on the sector, I think. There's different types of valuation. I think what we're usually looking for is traction. If you're showing traction amongst users, if users are using your product, it's because you're fulfilling a need, you're delighting them or solving a pain point. And so if there's third-party validation, and the third party is your users, and you're actually giving them what they want, and that is causing you to grow, then that's extremely valuable. And that for me personally is one of the strongest signal points.
Interesting. You've been doing this for so long. What's the biggest mistake you see that companies do when they come to you and with an idea? What's like the the head scratching, like I can't believe that again this person's
not. I wouldn't say there's any really big mistake. Well, the one thing I would say is that if you're going to pitch a corporate, or if you're a banker or an FA and you're pitching a corporate, the quick note, like, I've got something really interesting, let's chat. The air of mystique, that's not super useful. I'd say that's a personal pet peeve. I still respond and chat and do the call, but it would be just nicer if you would be sort of more direct. That's the only thing I'd say, probably.
Got it. And any piece of other piece of advice to I know a lot of you probably are early stage startups. Any advice to how to one day get a $1 billion check from you?
What?
Not from you personally, from Tencent corporate.
Yeah, above my pay grade. But I'm here to meet startups. I'll be at the entrance after the talk. If any of you want to meet up, I'm happy to trade a name card and we can find time later. Excellent.
Well, we're just about up with our time. It's been fascinating, and I hope you all took notes, and we'll be sending your carefully crafted, specifically worded, get concise pitches to Dan over here. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.